All right, greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sale. And tonight we're going to be talking about not something specifically South Africa politics related, but more something a bit more transcendental, something a bit older than current events, something a bit more lasting and forever than current events. And that theme is the theme of the storyteller, something in the southern Africa that many cultures here understand very intimately, the role of the storyteller within the culture, within the community. And it's something that I think if you grow up in South Africa, you have a very strong appreciation for, whether you be a Tswana or a Zulu or an Afrikaner. There is a very strong role for the storyteller to different degrees, but it's something that's in the modern West, in the United States and in Europe, something that has been neglected, something that's faded a little bit. So I'm going to be going into that. I'm not going to be doing an academic lecture. Um, I'm going to just be chatting with you guys about it, sharing some thoughts that I have on it. And you can remember, this is a conversation. You can also add your questions or comments in the live chat section, and we'll be talking about that. So I see the Prudentialist has already joined us. Nice to see you, man. Thank you very much for tuning in. Sideliner Opinion says, hi, CC. I hope it's a good story. Oh, I forgot to read what So Prudentialist says. Looking forward to this. Sideliner Opinion says, hi, CC. Hope it is quite a story. Koketso, my man, thank you very much for tuning in. Nice to see you. Says, what's up, good people. A Walrus says, evening. 900T16 says, hi, CC. Hope it is all well. Thanks for the stream. Sideline Opinion says, Aaron's is going to tell us a bedtime story. Okay, so, well, that's not exactly what's going to be happening, but it is an interesting idea you have there, because the bedtime story does fall into the archetype of the storyteller. So why I picked this topic for tonight was actually due to a conversation I had with one of my friends that is tuning in here, and that is the Prudentialist. Yo, I almost said his name with a very, very heavy Afrikaans accent. But yeah, so I had a great conversation with him after he made a recent video. Let me just make sure I got the title correct. So he made a video recently called Down the Capillaries, it's based on a piece that he wrote, where he just wrote basically about a drive that he has on a regular basis, and the thoughts that he had on the observations that he always makes when he does this drive. And the piece really flows like a Sunday afternoon drive, or just a drive through the countryside on a nice afternoon. And then we had a conversation afterwards where I said it's very refreshing to have this type of new, fresh piece of writing in our sphere, if you can call it that, seeing as it's not a cold and clinical piece of political analysis. It's not, today we're unpacking what's going on in Putin's mind, or this is the geopolitical significance of the Donbass area. It's just a writing on a Sunday, or writing of a drive that he had. And I think that's very important, that we actually have more of these types of pieces of writing. That's why I wanted to make this stream, because in that conversation we had in private, I told him that that is actually, I like the style that choice that he took there, seeing as that it does have a storyteller element. He's not doing hardcore political analysis. He's making observations. He's telling a story. He's presenting a narrative, a story narrative, but it has politics subtly interwoven into it, without having it like a hammer come down on your head. So anyway, so that's what led me to this stream. So I got thinking about the storyteller figure, because I told Prudentialist that it's something that the West has kind of lost to a degree, but here in Africa we still have a very strong appreciation for it. So let me just start off very quickly with okay, so that context is out of the way. The thing about the storyteller is that a lot of people just have a gift for it. I think all of you probably know someone, whether that be a family member or a friend or a colleague, that just when they tell you a story, it just grips you. They can just tell you about their weekend or an experience they had over the weekend, and it just enthralls you. You just want to learn more, because they just have that gift. They just have that talent to tell a good story. And there's always been a very strong role, and a very important role, for those types of people in a community, because stories, in the end, when it comes to what's the word? Disseminating values and ideas in a community. Let me put it this way: think about the typical scenario of where you would have a storyteller. It's a person that stands up, everyone's sitting around a fire usually, and then this is just the archetypical classic scene, and then there's this one guy that stands up, or he's sitting down and he's telling a story and everyone is focused on him. Now, do you really think that man, if he's telling a story there, he's giving them an analysis on why inflation is going to go up in 2 weeks, or he's telling them, this is why Russia is invading Ukraine? No, he's telling them a story about uh, a month ago, I was walking down this road and I encountered this strange person, and he told me this most amazing tale of a place far away. And he tells you this story and everyone's listening, and when you're a good storyteller, within those stories are, and that's where folk tales and stuff comes from as well, within those stories are interwoven values and even observations on politics and not current affairs, but the way the world is ordered, um, specifically through the symbolism in those stories, but then also on a more deeper level based on the almost unsaid stuff in those stories, things that some people just pick up. You just pick it up in your unconscious, and that's where things like archetypes come in. Now archetypes are something that Carl Jung wrote about, the psychoanalyst and psychologist. Actually, I have some of his books here behind me. I know he's a controversial figure in conservative or on the right side of the spectrum sometimes. I do think he has a lot of value to add, especially in many of his analyses on things like the unconscious and the archetypes. So basically, just to sum that up very, very succinctly, archetypes are symbolic images we unconsciously recognize and understand. Now, an archetype would be like the hero. The hero's journey is another archetypical theme, or the archetype of the thief, the archetype of the wise king, the archetype of the wise old man, the healing old woman in the community. These are all archetypes that you just naturally understand and pick up on, and they all usually factor into stories. Now, before I continue, I just want to give the chat some TLC. I see a Prudentialist says, I'm quite flattered, Conscious Caracal. Thank you all. No, thank you. You inspired our conversation, inspired this stream, because I thought it was a very interesting thing to discuss. I think here Carl Green has put up a link to Prudentialist video. I'm not sure. I can't click it now, but it's in the chat there, I think. I don't take responsibility for if it's not. There's a lot of comments. Unfortunately, not going to be able to get to all of them. I want to get into the lecture. I said in the beginning, it's not a lecture. I want to get into the presentation first, and then we can. I'm going to get in, because there's a lot of comments, and I'm barely started with the conversation. So that's the thing, is when it comes to these types of things like the archetypes, they play into a role into these types of stories, and that's where oral traditions come in. Now, in Southern Africa, we have a lot of cultures with very strong oral traditions, and you see a lot of examples of this. So maybe I should start off with one of those examples, but before I do that, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that I'm live, because when I get into a groove on stream, I forget to post on my Telegram group that we've gone live. So let me just do that, just to make sure that that everyone knows. Give me 1 second. All right. Sweet. I think we are good now. Okay. Anyway, so what I wanted to tell you there is I actually had this. I saw this tweet here today of a quote that says, "Myth is not prehistory; it is timeless reality, which repeats itself in history." And that's Ernst Jünger who said that. Also Ernst. So yeah, that's actually something that I think is very important to note, is the fact that when it comes to myths, when it comes to stories, there are all these hyper real characters in them, hyper real scenarios. Now, hyper real means it's so concentrated that it's actually more real than reality. So let's take, for example, the like a character like a wise king. Now, in reality, you have had through history wise kings, but they weren't caricatures. They weren't characters in the story. They were real. So they were wise, but they weren't wise as a king in a children's story or a king in a folk tale would be. The wise king in the folk tale was almost perfectly the wise king. That's his entire identity. He never strays from it. That's his archetype. And when it comes to myths, for a hero in a myth, it is rather that hyper real figure that you get in the myth or the story is represented in reality by watered down versions of it. So you're not going to get the perfect hero figure as you would get, for example, in a folk tale or in a Greek myth. You would get a flawed human version of it in reality, but you still recognize it as a hero. You still recognize it as the hero figure. And that's the thing. That's why the storyteller is so important, because through these stories, and whether that story be a bedtime story that's told by a parent to their child, or a story that's told around a campfire in a family setting, or in a friend just among friends, within those stories are contained these types of archetypes, like the hero, like the thief, like the wise king, like the nurturing mother. All these types of symbols are in there. And then when you hear those stories, specifically when you're younger as well, you learn to recognize them in real life as well. But I'm going to get to that just a little bit. Let's check here what's going on in chat. I see a walrus says it forms a strong bedrock for culture. Yes, absolutely. Um, and then I see, I think it's a bit facetious to claim that European culture doesn't share stories, fairy tales, bedtime stories anymore. Many of us still do, just not between adults. Yes, no, absolutely. I don't think it's the case that it's completely died out or that it's a non event anymore in the West. But it's something that has faded. It's something that is not as prominent anymore. Families, and it really depends from culture to culture, and it depends from country to country. Some countries, for example, with very strong family bonds and very strong family structures and a focus on family, definitely still have those traditions of gathering around the fire and having a conversation, or something as simple as having dinner together and then telling stories, or having that type of oral tradition. So no, absolutely, I completely agree that it's not something that's, maybe I put it too simply at the beginning. It's not something that was just wiped out or something that's gone, but there is, at least from what I can see and observe, definitely a decline in the prevalence of this type of culture. It's something that's been replaced by other forms of entertainment, things that have watching television, playing video games, all these other types of entertainment have taken its place in many regards, and that's unfortunate. Prudential says that's why CC needs shoals. Yeah. All right. Sideliner opinion says Bible story is huge too, folk tales in some cultures. Yes, I'm going to get to the Bible as well later. A walrus says, agree on the decline. Just wanted to highlight that there's still hope. Yes, absolutely. This is not a black pilled stream. I'm not going to tell you that it's a hopeless scenario, but it's something to be aware of, that there is this decline, because then you will be able to, you'll be attentive to it, and you'll be able to actually do something about it from your own in your own capacity. All right. So let's get back on track. Yes. So in South Africa, you have very strong oral traditions still in many cultures, specifically in Black cultures. You still have a very strong oral tradition of storytelling that relates to history, that relates to family affairs, the story of the clan, the story of where your family comes from, the story of how every person in your family is connected. Or maybe rather, maybe that's not the right way to express it. How the living are connected to the ancestors, how people that are alive today, how you are form part of that great chain of being of being with the people that came before you. So maybe I'll use an illustration of how strong this oral tradition is from my own experience. I'm going to be a storyteller here tonight. How meta is that? So in 2020, I went on a trip with a work trip with my colleague Barend Ace, who does amazing work for AfriForum as our head of intercultural matters and assistance, and also in Afrikaans it's skakeling. So intercultural. cooperation, that's the word. Intercultural cooperation. So we went to the Eastern Free State to go to visit the Baroka Seleka tribe, which is a Tswana tribe there in the Eastern Cape. And we were contacted by the royal family there of the Baroka Seleka tribe in Tabanshu, there in the Eastern Cape, because they were experiencing some very serious problems for a while now with political interference in the monarchy there. So we went to assist them, and that's still an ongoing case. There's still an ongoing assistance going on there, and my colleague Barent is doing excellent work. So why I'm telling this story is what really made a big impression on me. Well, many things made a big impression on me on that trip. I was very fortunate to be able to join my colleague on it. But when we were sitting there in the house of royalty, there among the royal family there, the royal family was sitting there, and then also some of the community elders were sitting there. And it was interesting. Something that really stood out to me was the fact that they all had a very strong and very solid and detailed sense of their community's history and its relation to other communities. Now, these people aren't people that went and studied history. They didn't read massive amounts of books on their own community's history. They just know it, and they know it through that oral tradition. Now, oral tradition is that passing down of knowledge and values and a worldview from the one generation to the next. And it just really struck me that they were all so clued up on every little minute detail. And it was just amazing to see that they have this very strong sense of the past, what happened, their relation to different groups, and the sequence of events up until then. And it's all from that oral tradition, which is very interesting, because I'll give you an example of it. So one of the elders said, so because AfriForum was there to assist them in this context, we were almost like representing the Afrikaner community in this context. And one of the elders there said, it's very interesting and very apt to see, and I'm paraphrasing, to see the Afrikaners. Well, no, he used the he said to see the Afrikaners come to our aid in this time, seeing as you are now returning the favor of when we came to your aid all those years ago. And he was talking about. Let me just make sure I get my dates right. So he was talking about. I just want to make sure I don't give you a false story, a false date, and then you go and tell it to someone else, and then it's the facts are wrong. Here we go. It was Vegkop. Just want to make sure. Yeah, it's 1836. So what he's talking about in regards to the Afrikaners coming to assist and repay a favor of the past was what happened in 1836 after Hendrik Potgieter, the Voortrekker leader, was attacked and plundered at Vegkop by the Matabele king Mzilikazi. Actually, his book I've got here, The Story of Mzilikazi, but that's a whole different stream. And the Voortrekkers were assisted by Chief Maroka II, who was then the chief of the Baroka Seleka tribe, who we are assisting now who we were assisting then in 2020. And he assisted the Boers with oxen to pull their wagons and a liberal provision of supplies. So here's what's interesting. That event that happened 170, no more, 109, almost 200 years ago, 190 years ago, the members of this tribe that are alive today still have that recollection in their mind. They know exactly what happened there. They know the players there. They know who was present there. They know the dynamics of the different groups that are there in high detail. And they tie the thread back from 1836 to 2020, and they see they see what's the correct word? The reciprocation or the returning of the favor. And they were very adamant to point that out, that it is very poetic and apt that now the Boers come to their aid, to the Baroka Seleka tribe's aid, the descendants of Chief Maroka II, after they assisted us 190 years ago. So just the dynamic, or not the dynamic, or what the oral tradition enabled in that story, or in my story, shows how valuable it is to many communities, and the role it plays in regards to people's ideas of the past, and knowing what happened. And it's sad, because this is another good example of the way that our history has been just completely twisted by propagandists and people that are doing it out of malice. This amazing story of cooperation between this Trana tribe and the Boers during the Great Trek, and it's just nobody knows it happened. And in regards to no people that, for example, Afrikaners, vast majority of Afrikaners don't even know it happened. I didn't know it happened up until 2020, until I heard about it there. It's an absolute tragedy, and our history is full of those types of stories. But all we hear are all the stories that fit the political narrative, all the stories that fit Julius Malema's agenda, all the stories that fit Cyril Ramaphosa's agenda, stories that frame this South African history, or the history of Southern Africa, as just this white and black, very simple white hats, black hats, evil people, good people, bloodbath. But it's absolutely not that. It's full of these nuances, and it's so interesting. That's a whole different stream for another day. But just that I wanted to use that story as an example, by being a storyteller, telling a story about a storyteller. Just the impact, or the impression that it made on me, getting such a detailed and thorough history lesson from someone that's not a history scholar. He's not a person that did his PhD in this, but he knows exactly all the little details. I mean, that's how the oral tradition does it. But it's not as if this person only heard the story once. It's a story that's constantly told through the oral tradition. It's constantly reaffirmed. The story is always repeated, and it's always interwoven into the collection of different stories that are told in that community. And that's just one community. Then there's many other communities all across South Africa who have their own stories and their own historical narrative that they also use to make sense of the world today. But that's also where we get many of these blood feuds still in South Africa, where you have, for example, different cultures or different families or clans that don't get along, or still have animosity towards each other based on something that happened 200 years ago. It also comes from that oral tradition, that the fact that you have friends and enemies in those stories. You have your ancestors were helped by some people, and they were also hard done by and stabbed in the back by others. And sometimes these types of animosities travel all the way to the present. A good example is the Anglo-Boer War, stories from the concentration camps. Many, if not the majority of Afrikaners, have family stories of the Boer War and how it affected their ancestors or our ancestors. And many even have direct stories from people that were in the concentration camps, that survived the concentration camps of the Anglo-Boer War. And those types of stories also play into how you see the world today. It doesn't mean that those stories need to then define all your stances on everything, but it is interesting that it does play a big role in how people see the world, sometimes even without them knowing that it plays a role. But yeah, that's it's very interesting to see that dynamic play out. So before I continue, let's give the chat some attention. I see a prudentialist says an outside pressure for global monoculture incentivizes the death of imagination and tradition. Absolutely. Feynor says talk about knowing your history. Koketso says true. The Freighter Watcher says please hit thumbs up and share the stream. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Seamus says the Irish can relate to this pod. Interesting. Many Irish actually came to fight in the Anglo-Boer War for no other reason than just wanting an excuse to put some lead in an Englishman's head. But that's also something you'll probably hear from some Irish stories. Kom ons kyk hierso. Hamilton Klaasse says greetings. Ek's nog bietjie nuut op jou kanaal, maar ek love die content. Agree met jou fully. It's sad just to fit the agenda. Yeah. There are many stories in South Africa that the majority of us don't know about, and it's the most incredible stories of cooperation, stories of friendship, stories of trust, stories of incredible, unimaginable bravery. And they're just lost because they don't fit a political narrative. They don't serve a purpose in the party politics of this country. And it's an absolute tragedy. Anyway, let's continue with, let's see, what was next on the agenda? Oh, yeah, that's the other thing. So this also plays into this oral tradition. When I was talking about earlier that there's a very strong oral tradition in Black cultures here in South Africa, that doesn't mean that this is a norm or like a rule for every family in South Africa. It depends on where in South Africa you grew up, which culture you come from, where, if you're in a city or in rural areas. In rural areas, it's much stronger. In urban areas, much less so. Also depends on where your income bracket, I think, and this is only speculation, I think the higher your income bracket, also the less storytelling will play a role in your family or in your community, seeing as then you have all these other luxuries and things that distract you, all these other nice things that you'd rather spend your time on than sitting on your grandfather's lap and listening to his story about I don't know, some heroic act that he witnessed. So yeah, but in Afrikaner culture, from our perspective, we do have a strong oral tradition. It has been watered down as well for many of the reasons that I have listed. But just from my family, I know most of the history, the basic history of South Africa, and also of the larger region, I got from my parents. I got from my father telling me about. I didn't learn about the Boer War for the first time in school. I learned about it from my dad when I was 5 years old, 6 years old. I learned of the Great Trek from my father way before I learned about it in school. And in school, I just learned about it in passing, like a little paragraph in the history book. All these things, Second World War, First World War, didn't learn about it for the first time in school. Learned about it from talking to older people, talking to my grandfather or talking to my father. It's that oral tradition. That's also the oral tradition being demonstrated or being exercised in just a different form. It's the passing down of history and the passing down of values. So in many of, for example, many cultures, or actually I would rather say in many societies today in modern times, parents have just contracted the schools to really teach their children history and to teach the children values. They've outsourced it. Parents have outsourced the teaching of history and of values to schools because then they can spend their time on other things. And then the schools, usually public schools, are pumping kids' heads full of all this just alternative history and absolutely just twisted history that serves a political agenda, the type of political agenda that I was talking about earlier. And it's unfortunate because that's where the oral tradition really shines. That's where the storyteller really shines, is in that moment where values and history are passed down to the next generation. Why is our community the way it is? Why does our culture value X, Y, and Z? Why do we oppose X, Y, and Z? All these types of values, all these types of perspectives. And for example, if you're an Afrikaner and you don't know the details, the true details of the Boer War, many things are not going to make sense to you. You're not going to understand why in the previous century, the apartheid government was formed on this, what's the word? Uh, mission of wanting to eradicate the arm blanke vraagstuk, the poor white question. You're not going to understand why Afrikaners and many white South Africans, but specifically Afrikaners, were so bitterly impoverished in the first half of the first quarter, or the first third, really, including the Great Depression of the 20th century. It comes from the Anglo-Boer War and the scorched earth policy, where tens of thousands of Boer farms were burned down. More women and children dying in concentration camps than soldiers on both sides. These are the types of things that you need to understand many of the historical things that follow them, whether those historic things are evil or good. They all flow from things that happened in the past. But that's the value of the storyteller. The storyteller is the man who has that talent to take a story. Now, whether that mission be to disseminate or to spread values or historical knowledge to a next generation, or specifically a next generation, he uses his talent to do that through a true historical account, telling about sharing history, or through fiction, which then spreads values and ideas and worldviews among people. So, for example, that's where folk tales come in. That's where children's stories come in. I want to know, actually, before I continue, seeing as the chat is very is actually very interesting. I want to wait. I see here. I missed the Prudentialist gave a $2 super chat who says, "Cheers, friend. Here's to many more stories to tell." Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Prude. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Before I continue, I just want to check if there's any questions. Yuan N says, "Ernst, you and I had similar upbringings. However, I may be more radical. I won't stand for the lies formulated by liberals in our history." Well, that's absolutely what you need to do. Don't stand for any lies. There's actually a great quote. I wanted to use it in a different context in the stream, but I'll use it now anyway. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who said, "The simple act of an ordinary brave man is not to participate in lies, not to support false actions. His rule, let that, meaning lies, come into the world. Let it even reign supreme, only not through me." And I think that's exactly what you're talking about here, Yuan. There's going to be a lot of lies in the world. There's always going to be a lot of lies. But at least from your perspective, from your position, you're not going to participate in those lies. You're not going to spread them. And that's my approach to propaganda as well. I'm not going to willingly spread propaganda, whether it fits my narrative or my agenda or whatever, or my cause or not. I'm not going to spread falsities. I'm not going to spread lies, because that makes me a liar. I can't stand for that. I see Nulis says, "Learning history and tradition from your forefathers elevates knowledge to a personal experience. This is why it's crucial to pass on your heritage and legacy." Absolutely. Very, very great, or very good comment. Thank you very much. Sideliner Opinion says, "You will not read in history books about your great-grandmother jailed for refusing to give her horses to the English." Yeah, those are the types of stories that you hear. Those are the types of stories that are passed down through generations, and it gives you a perspective on history, but also on how people act, how people behave. That's the maybe before I continue, that's actually the role of, that's the value of fiction as well. Great fiction has characters that are hyper real, but they are real. They are written in a way that you recognize these types of characters in real life as well. They are real because they interact with other characters in a way a real organic person would. They have, and this is the mark of a great writer, the mark of a absolutely master writer of fiction, is that he can create these characters that are indistinguishable from real people. They are always consistent to their character. They operate like real people. And if you read that fiction, you see these types of people and how they interact with other people. It actually teaches you lessons about real life because they're written so well. You might as well be seeing the interaction between other people in real life, if that makes sense. Let's see what I wanted to say next. Oh yeah, before I continue, I just wanted to ask a question to the chat. Did you have whether you be South African or not, did you have a similar experience to me where you had a family member or a senior figure in your life, whether that be an older figure or a family member, that was a storyteller that told you about history, that told you about stories that conveyed values to you, that conveyed culture to you. Was that a thing in your growing up? I actually want very curious to know. Tell me in the chat while I continue here. So yeah, I already covered a fiction as a vehicle. Yeah, and that's actually something that I talked to Prudentialist about as well. I think a while back, we were also talking in private, and I said I actually think fiction is a much more effective vehicle for spreading values and ideas than nonfiction. Nonfiction is pretty much for a very select niche group of people, and it's very specific. Like, here's a book on inflation, here's a book on the Second World War, here's a book on tank tactics. But fiction, you through fiction, you fiction basically talks to the unconscious mind. Fiction is full of those archetypes, symbols, themes that your unconscious mind picks up on, and it conveys values to you without you even knowing it. For example, the hero's journey is something that all of us know. I mean, you see it everywhere. You see it in Greek uh, myths. You see it in something as modern as Star Wars. It's this whole thing of the heroic figure who comes from a humble background, builds himself up, fails, gets up again, fails, gets up again, keeps fighting until he overcomes his adversary or the obstacle in his way. And through that story, for example, I gave a very simple version of it, but in that story of the hero that persists, you get that value of never give up, or never bow before evil, or never stay silent when you witness injustice. Those types of values, those type of moral statements, those types of normative moral statements, those types of moral commands almost are interwoven into those stories. And that's where children's stories specifically come in. All these types of folk tales. There's always a theme. Have you noticed? There's always a theme connected to it. Don't lie. Always be honest. Don't steal. Don't cheat. Always help a friend in need. Respect your elders. All these types of very fundamental, valuable values are always in the best children's stories, always have them interwoven into them. And a horrible children's story goes out and tells the child, do this, don't lie, don't cheat, don't X, Y, and Z. A brilliant children's story, or even just a brilliant story, doesn't have to be a children's story, conveys that message and that theme without hitting you over the head with it. You pick up on it just automatically. Horrible stories and horrible films are the ones that hit you over the head with the themes, like don't be bad, be good, uh vote like this, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. They give you conclusions that you should be coming to on your own. That's the mark of a good film. That's the mark of a good writer. Is a writer, a filmmaker, or a storyteller. Filmmakers and writers are storytellers. They fall under that umbrella that conveys those messages, conveys a political message, conveys a moral statement, conveys a value, conveys an idea without blatantly telling the audience, this is what I'm trying to tell you, this is how I want the world to be, this is what's right. It subtly is interwoven into the story. And I think that's what I was talking about. In my opinion, that's a lot more effective than these types of films or stories that just hit the audience over the head with the message. It's not going to go in. It's just going to metaphorically crack their skull, and then they're not going to remember anyway what they were told. A good story and a good storyteller. Well, a good story needs a good storyteller. It interweaves those themes and narratives and values in. Yes, yeah, exactly. Feanor says Dostoevsky was very good at this. Exactly. No, perfect example of a writer that writes characters that might as well be real. He doesn't write a Captain America type of character. He writes a real gritty human being that might as well exist. And that gritty human being figure interacts with other real characters in his story, real in the hyper real sense. And then you get these transference of values and ideas and worldviews and even politics without the writer even having to do it. They just come naturally. That's actually one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from someone on writing fiction, is that don't start a story with, I want to write a story about why addiction is bad, or um, why cheating is bad. You should write this, you should write the characters first, create the world. And if those characters are real enough, if those characters really come from the heart, if they're real, they're written in a realistic way, and how they interact with each other, your views and your politics or whatever message you want to get out there will just come naturally through the story. Because it's, if you start that story with, I'm going to write a story on why lying is bad, and then you write the characters and the story around that, the message is always going to be the main course. It's always going to be the thing in the face of the reader. And that's not a great story. That doesn't enthrall, that doesn't grip. Johan N says, Rocky de Beer, Pieter Retief, Joepie Fourie, Generaal G.H. Schoeman, De Wet, De La Rey, those are good stories. Yes, absolutely. Those are just some of the figures in our history that have amazing stories. I want to give the chat a little bit of attention before I continue, because I asked you a question. I don't want to ask you a question and then not actually read your answers. That would be very, very disrespectful and rude of me. Let's see. Okay, the first one is Sideliner Opinions, who said, my son asked an old Polish man, how did the Poles manage to survive all their tragedies? He said their language and culture brought them together again and gave them a reason to carry on. That's very nice. So remember, I asked you the question, did you get these types of stories told to you by an adult or a parent or a wise figure in your life, a storyteller? Feynor says, I remember my grandfather telling me how the English forced him to wear a wooden board that around his neck that said donkey just because he was an Afrikaner. Let's see. So Seamus says, I think many of us regret not making more videos on things from years past, as those days are long gone. Sideliner Opinion says, yes, my grandfather, who was a farmer, taught me much through stories, fiction and non-fiction. Johan N says, and these are answers to my question. Johan N says, yes, my father was a Buddha music maker. He played the FRK songs and his own songs with concertina, keyboard, and guitar. Very nice. And then he adds, that way he passed on stories from generations before him. Yes, music plays a very strong role in the storytelling tradition. Let's see. Feynor says, my grandfather was one of the best storytellers I've ever met. His neighbors used to visit him at night just to listen to him tell the stories on his porch. That's the type of man I'm talking about. That guy that just naturally does it, that just naturally knows how to tell a story. Boring as it may be, he'll spice it up and make it interesting, just with little things like the tone of his voice, what he focuses on, etc. Koketso says, even the woke know the value of storytelling. That's why Dr. Ibrahim X. Kendi created a children's illustration book titled The Anti-Racist Baby, a fantastically woke waste of ink and pages. Yeah, that's true. That's something leftists and the critical theorists know intimately, is the value of language and the value of stories. And specifically, the value of those stories and language as they are used as propaganda directed at children. That's definitely something they understand. That's why they are obsessed with language. That's why they're obsessed with teaching children. And I said it the other day. Debates might win culture battles, but language wins culture wars. And I think I'll add to that, stories and narratives and myths also win culture wars. Let's see. Because I asked you that question, I just want to make sure I get to as many answers as possible. Gatskop Software, shout out. Oh, wait, I saw Gatskop Software gave a super chat earlier. Almost forgot. 70 Rand super chat. Gatskop, thank you very much. Again, go check out his Twitter account. He is making a Boer War game. Very nice. Another medium of storytelling if you do it correctly. Thank you very much for the super chat, Gatskop. I'm going to get to your comment here now. You said, wait, that was not the comment that I wanted to highlight. Where is that comment? 1 second, just bear with me. Here we go. Did I really now lose it? No, here we go. He says at Markersfontein, there was a scout sent out on the train track with a bicycle on the train tracks, but was too scared to go all the way. Sideline opinion says Japie Greiling, sadly neglected story. Amazing story. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time to go through all the brilliant stories from our past, but that's another great story. If you have time, just Google Japie Greiling, one of the great heroes of Afrikaner culture. Let's see. Yeah. So to get back to that, that's also the importance of telling stories to your children. Good stories, stories with values in them. You don't have to be a masterful storyteller. You just need to tell them stories, because the good stories contain those archetypes that they're going to have to be able to recognize in real life. The types of people, like the thief, the untrustworthy person, the scammer, the used car salesman. I think that's my favorite modern archetype, is definitely the used car salesman. But yeah, these are the things that children need to recognize. These types of people, almost like archetypes of people that they will encounter throughout their lives. And a good story will teach them how to deal with those and react to those types of people even before they've even met them. A good writer can write those types of characters into a story, preparing a child for those types of people in real life before he's even met them. Someone that I wanted to give a big shout out to, unfortunately, for a long time no longer with us, is my favorite Afrikaner philosopher, in Pierre van Wyk Louw. Someone mentioned him in the chat earlier. Master of storytelling. I think I prefer his fiction to his non-fiction. His fiction is absolutely phenomenal. His story of Raka, his epic poem, is a phenomenal story filled with symbolism and values and political statements. But it doesn't hit you over the head. It's actually a good story. Actually has a little bit of debate on what some things mean and how you interpreted some things. Now, the Raka is an excellent example of that type of story, of this monster that lives outside of a small village in Africa. And the monster walks around, and he paces outside of the village, but he can't come in. He can only get into the village if he is let in by someone on the inside. And then he seduces the women of the village with his strong body, and he gets the children to admire him also through his strength and through his little tricks that he does. And then they let him into the village, and it's actually a tragic tale. But yeah, that's an example of that. So let me see what you guys have been saying. Let's see. Yuan N says, this is maybe the second time I've listened to you. I've seen you with Adam's roots in the court before. Yes. I want to contribute by not just donating. How do I go about that? Well, Johan, there's many ways that you can help your community, and specifically that you can help AfriForum as well. Well, firstly, you can become a member, which I assume you are based on your comment. Thank you very much. But then also you can get involved. You can get involved at a branch, an AfriForum branch in your community, or you can become part of a neighborhood watch. There's many of these projects that you can become part of, projects that help feed the needy in your community, projects, and all run by AfriForum. If you join a branch, they do all of this stuff. Well, depending on where you are, some have less capacity than others, some branches. But filling potholes, cleaning up, making your community safe. Go to AfriForum's website, or just Google AfriForum Get Involved, and you'll see all the ways that you can get involved to help. But thank you very much. That's a very nice comment of yours. Rick Herren says, interessant. Well, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. Ek bly jy vind dit interessant. Gatskop Software says, top history sites in South Africa that you guys must do: Isandwala, Bloedrivier, Spioenkop, Magersfontein, Unkunkulunkulu. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. Yeah, great suggestions. I think I've been to I haven't been to Isandwala. I've been to Blood River. I've been to Spioenkop. I've not been to Magersfontein. I think maybe I have been. I'm going to have to go check through some of my old pictures. But yeah, so yeah, that's what I wanted to discuss regarding the storyteller, it's really something that I think it's not lost. As let me just check who was that comment before I saw it here, because I want to give credit to someone that actually mentioned this. Yeah, it was a walrus. This one. Agree on decline. Just wanted to highlight that there's still hope. Yes, that's actually what I wanted to add here. This stream is not to say, well, now the West's oral tradition is gone, it's completely destroyed, and it's never coming back. It's been neglected in many parts. It's been watered down in many parts. In some cultures, in some countries, it's still alive and well. But it's going to be our responsibility to keep it alive and well in the future and going into the future. So maybe that's my message: is that listen to the storytellers, appreciate them, encourage them. If you know those types of people and they want to tell you a story, listen. It's much more. Let me trust me. It's a lot more valuable to listen to a story from your grandfather or from your father, or listen to a story told by a wise mentor, than to watch the latest Marvel movie or to watch another episode of anime. I think it's a lot more valuable. And if you have the opportunity, I would definitely recommend it. Oh yeah, before I forget, I did mention that I was going to bring in how the Bible factors into this as well. Excellent example of a book filled with many, a plethora of stories that convey values, morals, worldviews in a masterful way. I mean, there's so many incredible stories. Just this week, I finished writing a chapter for a new book that Storyteller is bringing out. So the book is called Die Christen en sy eiendom, the Christian and his, not belongings, the Christian and his property. And in that book, I was asked to write a chapter for them. And well, I was very honored. I wrote this chapter partly based on the story of Nabot's Wingerd. Now, I don't know what Nabot in English is. So let's see. 1 Kings 21. Let me just see what the translation is. What was his name in English? Naboth. Yeah. So Naboth's vineyard. I based my chapter on Naboth's vineyard. And that's an example of a story that contains all these amazing values and all this, and a very strong message that's still applicable today. And if it's told by a masterful storyteller, it just elevates it to the next level. I see here Johan N says, I'm in Hartbeespoort. I see there's a chapter here. Otherwise, I believe the community would benefit more from it than from our counselors. Well, go check it out. If there's a AfriForum branch there close to you, go check out. It can't hurt to just attend one meeting and get in contact with them. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But go check it out. I think it could be actually a very good experience for you to give back. Gatkop Software says, Adams, if you come to Magersfontein, let me know. I'll meet you there. I stay close to it. Excellent. I'll let you know definitely if I ever plan that trip. Koketso Rozane says, Netflix using a black woman to portray a legendary Viking king is reason enough not to rely on entertainment media for historical context or storytelling. Exactly, because that's what's happened now, is that storytelling has become so cheapened by politics, but to a point where, I mean, there's always been politics in storytelling. Let's not kid ourselves that fiction, whether that be film or books or whatever, has never been influenced by politics, deeply influenced by politics, definitely. But I feel in our time, it's become just so blatant and cartoonish. It's gotten to a point where the message is more important than the medium. The message is more important than the story. The characters are all just vehicles to get to this, hit the audience over the head with the political message that they want to get out there. That's horrible storytelling. That's a terrible film. If that's what you're doing, a good story and a good film conveys that message and that value and that moral statement without hitting the audience over the head with it. But I got into that in detail, but that's a very important point. Is that's for me the mark of a good film. I mean, I'm not an expert on this type of stuff. I'm just saying it like I observe it. Be Smart says, nice to see you do this, Ernst. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for the kind comments. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Annie says, "Hey, Koketso." Seeing, I think you guys know each other from the chat. Anyway, yeah. So that's why I wanted to cover this. It's absolutely not lost the storyteller in the community, but it is something that's in danger. It's something that needs to be revived in many communities again. And I said earlier, many people have a talent for it. That's true, but it doesn't mean that you have to always leave it to those people with a talent for storytelling to tell the stories. You can also be a storyteller. I mean, what do you do when you stand around the braai and you're just chatting? You're telling stories. You're a storyteller. You might not be the best one, but you're telling stories. And many of those stories, there are lessons. In many of those stories, there are morals. In many of those stories, there are values. And you're, like I said earlier, when it comes to that advice that I got on writing fiction, you shouldn't start off with the message or the moral or the value. You start off with the good story. You start off with the good, well rounded, well written characters. And then your message or your value comes naturally through it. And the same thing happens when you're chatting around the braai, when you're chatting with your friends and telling stories. Your unconscious mind will interweave into many of those stories values, statements, moral statements, political statements, uh, and messages without you even consciously doing it. So that's the value of it. So don't be shy. Don't leave, even if you're not the best storyteller. If you've got a story to tell and you're in that social setting, do it. It's an amazing thing. I mean, I'm not the best storyteller by any stretch of the imagination, but I shared many stories here with you tonight, and I have many others that I can also tell on future streams. But you can also be that storyteller, but appreciate it from other people as well. That's maybe a stronger point or a point that I want to emphasize more is when someone tells you an intimate or a special story, something from the past, something that happened, appreciate it, especially if it's coming from an older person, someone that has experienced the ups and downs of life, someone that knows what's going on, or at least knows more about what's going on than you. Give them the time of day. Let's see here. Sideline opinion says long story jokes have disappeared for all practical purposes. Cancel culture and CRT killed it. Moped Man One says, big shout out from Great Britain. Enjoy your content. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Rick Herren says, ek het baie eystervark en jakkalsjag stories. Well, those are the type of stories you need to share. Andre says, a good story binds you to the past in a manner that resonates for all time. Take the Bible 2,000 years ago and we still remember it. A good story brings us together, binds people to a certain time. Absolutely. Gatskop Software says, take your kids to history sites, let them see, smell, and live it outside. I did take my kids to most of the battlefields, the Boer War battlefields that he's talking about, and army camps, told them everything. Amazing. That's an incredible story. Amazing. So yeah, that's flight my story is uit. But yeah, so before I say goodbye, I also just want to, and before I have my final thoughts, I just want to also thank the sponsor again of tonight's stream, Bitvice, who is the only place in South Africa that sells Bitcoin directly to your self-custody, meaning that unlike a traditional crypto exchange, you don't have to trust anyone to hold your Bitcoin for you. This removes the largest risk associated with Bitcoin. If you're interested in learning about Bitcoin, check out their podcast called By the Horns. It's available on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you go check it out, tell them that you came from Conscious Caracal's channel. Just for, I don't get anything from you telling them, just a nicety. They release weekly episodes and focus specifically on the South African context surrounding Bitcoin. The Bitvice team has also been hard at work making some changes to their product over the past few months. You can now buy Bitcoin directly to your hardware wallet in a matter of seconds from them, and it's also been reduced to a 5K minimum from 20K. So yeah, go check it out. There's a link in the description. Even if you just want to ask them a question, send them a message, ask them if you have any questions about crypto. Very nice, helpful guys. They help me out, and they're kind enough to sponsor this episode as well. So yeah, Johan N says, what a breath of fresh air. Nee, ek was te laat vanaand, sal nou notifications stel as dit weer live is. Well, baie dankie, Johan. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you had some excellent comments here in the chat. You added to the conversation in a very valuable way. Sideliner Opinion says, thank you, Adams, for reminding us of the value of stories. May we keep it alive for future generations. Thank you, Sideliner. Yeah, guys, if you like this type of content, you can like and subscribe. You can also check out my Afrikaans channel if you are as jy Afrikaans is. Ag, hoekom moet ek dit sommer vir julle in Engels sê? As jy Afrikaans is, kan jy na my Afrikaanse kanaal toe gaan. Die naam is In Alle Erns. Daar's 'n skakel in die beskrywing. Daarso ontleed ek die huidige stand van sake in Suid-Afrika, maar ook bietjie dieper idees soos wat ons nou vanaand bespreek het, net in lekker Afrikaans. So gaan kry dit daar in die beskrywing. And then also, if you want to support what we do at AfriForum, become a member, just go to the AfriForum website and click join. If you live abroad, you can also support AfriForum by becoming a friend of AfriForum. Just Google Friends of AfriForum and you can become a friend there. Nulis says, excellent stream. Thank you very much. Gatskop says, I have to update it, but it has a lot of work and plenty of money. What's he talking about? Oh, he's talking to Seamus. He says some kind of survivor game. Oh, it's the Boer War game. Excellent. Yeah, go check out Gatskop Software on Twitter. All right, guys. Soos ek gesê het, flight, my story is uit. And thank you very much for tuning in. Just an update. This is my last piece of content for a while. I'm not going to be uploading any new content in April. I have some important things to tend to. Don't worry, it's not something serious, but it's going to take a lot of my attention. So I'm going to be busy there. I'm going to be checking social media, but not going to be posting a lot. Not going to be posting a lot of content. But thank you for your patience and thank you for understanding. I will be back not next month, not in April. I'll be back in May, the first week of May. I'll definitely be back with the next episode, and I'll check you then. And yeah, thank you for tuning in again. Thank you for everyone's questions or your comments in the live chat. Adds to the content. It's what I look forward to specifically with these discussion streams, is that not that I'm just here chatting to a screen. I'm interacting with you, and you have all these great insights that you've also shared with me here tonight. The Fredo Watcher says, thank you for another great conversation. Always interesting and enriching chat here. Thank you very much, the Fredo Watcher. Really appreciate it. All right, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, the rest of your evening, and also have a nice weekend. And I'll check you again on this channel. Oh, yeah. Before I say goodbye, just one more thing. Thank you very much for all the support that a lot of you give to this channel. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for sharing these streams on social media everywhere. I always see people sharing them, and it's really nice to see. And thank you for just, an hour of your attention is very valuable. That's something that many people would rather spend doing other things. So giving an hour of your attention to listen to some of my thoughts is really nice. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate all your, specifically your comments and your questions as well. It really adds a different level to the content. So I just wanted, seeing as I'm going not be chatting here on this channel for a few weeks, just wanted to put that out there to say thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'll check you guys again the first week of May. So stick around. I'm not going anywhere. And I'll check you guys again real soon. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.